Okay, very excited today to invite Dr. Lynch to talk about high-tech entrepreneurship. First, I would like to invite Mrs. Orfanido from the British High Commission to talk. Thank you.
I won't bother you for long. Good morning all. Thank you for coming. Just wanted to thank the European University for hosting us today. Professor Williams and Dr. Mavromoustagos and Dr. Mavromoustagos, of course. Just to say that education is a common element between UK and Cyprus. It's in the heart of the cultures of the two countries. Mike started his career as an academic, but he moved on and created a business that gave prosperity to his country and to himself, of course. So I think it's very interesting to hear how we marry these two, education and prosperity, and there's no one better to tell us than someone who has actually done it. So thank you again for hosting us, Mike.
Morning, everyone. So a little bit of background to sort of tell you about my journey.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's my fault.
Okay, sorry.
This is a very, very interactive session. Good morning to everyone. I would like to personally and institutionally welcome each of you to this interactive event. It's an exciting time for European University Cyprus as we continue to grow and adapt, remaining always adaptable, motivated and responsive to societal needs. The word technology is not a new one. In fact, the root of the word means to shift or to change, and was used originally in relation to changing nature, as Bacon, Locke, and Descartes recognized this idea of man changing nature rather than being controlled by it was essential to the emergence of the autonomous self, and eventually to the very notion of business. Thus, technology and businessship are tightly related, as you already mentioned. Today, we think of technology as being about electronics, computers, software, web applications, etc. But I would suggest that smart business people still view technology in whatever form as a means to an end and not an end of itself. In any case, this interactive session will help business people have a clear concept of what they are trying to accomplish, leverage technology in order to help them achieve their goals more rapidly. Dear friends, dear colleagues, dear students, it is a great honor for European University that Mr. Mike Lynch, Dr. Mike Lynch, has accepted our invitation to discuss in this important interactive session technology and entrepreneurship, ingredients for growth. Dr. Mike Lynch is one of the United Kingdom's business ambassadors. He's best known for founding Autonomy in 1996, the United Kingdom's largest software company. We know that he has long been regarded as a visionary figure within the technology world. He advises the Prime Minister on matters of science policy through the Council on Science and Technology. I would profusely like to thank Dr. Mike Lynch for his participation. Meanwhile, I would also like to congratulate Dr. Stefanos Mavromoustagos and his department, his colleagues, for this inspiring initiative. Throughout this session, I would kindly ask you to stay engaged, keep us proactive, and help us shape the future. My personal respect and thanks goes out to all of you. Thank you very much.
Well, I was so hoping to get the job of rector, but I didn't pull that one off. So really what I'm going to do is give you a little sort of rundown of my story. You know, one of the things I think sometimes when people come and talk to students is what they're doing can sometimes seem so far from the daily work that you're doing and going to lectures. But you know, I was sitting exactly where you are when I started my journey. So really what I'm going to do is take you through that. Now I've learned a lot about how you actually make technology businesses work. And I've also been involved a lot in the UK in trying to get the wonderful talent that's in the universities there and the wonderful ideas that come out of the research actually to be in companies and have an effect. So I do that for Cambridge. But if you go back now to the 1990s, I was doing research at Cambridge, and it was in the field of signal processing, which was about getting computers to understand the world around them. And I started a PhD, and I've really done that because I'd finished my degree, I really liked the technology. All my friends were going off to be things like accountants and solicitors and things like that, and I didn't want to do that. And it seemed a much nicer idea to stay at university and carry on doing research. So I stayed, and I got to work on all sorts of interesting things, and it was wonderful. One day we made some big advances in the mathematics and the work we were doing. We thought, well, hey, we could use this, we could found a company, and obviously we'd read about people taking technology and founding companies, and we thought that would be great. But at that point I had no business experience, no business knowledge, didn't know anything about how to do a business. And so the whole thing then has been learned from going along. And the first problem is, how do you get some finance? How do you get enough money just to get started? And the obvious thing I thought was you went to a bank, they're supposed to have money, and I had a meeting with the bank manager and I explained this wonderful new technology based on singular value decomposition in multiple eigenspaces, and he looked at me like I was mad and didn't give me any money. And you suddenly realise that actually it's not just the idea, you've got to have all the other parts of the process to actually make it work. And I carried on trying to see if I could get some money, and eventually I was very lucky in that I met a guy who had discovered one of the very large rock bands. And I was just, I was going to go meet anyone that could give us a bit of finance. And someone who knew someone who knew someone gave me an introduction. And I had to go to a pub, a bar in Soho in London, which is a lively bit of London. And I met this guy at about 7 o'clock in the evening. And by then he was drunk. And this was wonderful, because whatever I'd offered him, frankly, he'd given me some money. And I explained the idea, and I told him it was wonderful. And the guy said, okay, here's £2,000, go off. And what I found out later was that because he lived a life in the rock world, he used to get up at about 4 o'clock and start drinking, and then party until about 4 in the morning and carry on. Now, when I tell students this story, sometimes the rector gets a bit upset because, the reality here is I got my money by hanging around a pub. Perhaps you're supposed to do it a little bit more formally. But anyway, it worked and we got started. And what we first made was a machine that would take a fingerprint and search all the fingerprint records and find if there was a match. And the reason this was a very good thing to work on was at the time it was done by humans looking at paper. And for example, if there was a murder and the police wanted to search fingerprint, it would take 30 people a month just to search the fingerprint. And we made a machine that could do it in about 3 minutes. And the reason this is important is I was so bad at marketing or selling or anything like that because I'm a technology person. And if it had been a normal product, no one would have bought it. But because this thing meant you could go from taking 3 weeks with 30 people to catch a murderer to 3 minutes, the police didn't really care that I couldn't market it, they just wanted one, and they bought it. And so that got more money going into the business, and we started moving forward. And the first thing that I was learning there was how important it was to listen to the people that actually you're working with, trying to sell something to. Because when you're in a university, what you're listening to generally is other academics. So you read papers from other academics, read books from other academics. What you have to do is start to read and talk to the people who actually have to do the problem. You learn a vast amount more, in my example, rather than reading the academic papers on matching fingerprint. If you go and talk to a fingerprint officer and you find out what it's like when they go into a murder, and you have to learn all those practical details. And so I learned that listening was very important. So anyway, things start to get going quite well in the centre of these machines. We're still very small, so we have an office which is about that big. It was an office where it was supposed to be for one person, and we could only afford to rent an office for one person. We had 10 people in it. Now, the problem was that broke all the fire and insurance regulations of the building, but luckily the director of the building was a really nice man. And whenever he had to walk along the corridor where we were, he would go up a flight of stairs, go along and come down, so he didn't actually have to see this, because he would have had to throw us out. So he was very good. But the problem was, we'd be there in this tiny office, and we get some customer come in that might want to buy something, and they'd say, well, you know, we love your machine, it's great, but you're just too small as a company. We can't risk buying something from a company so small. And that was terrible, because we had the best machine. Why couldn't people buy it? But we were very lucky in that there was a cupboard in the corner of the room. And one day we had the bright idea, we put a big sign on the cupboard and it said, authorised personnel only beyond this point. And when people came in and they said, well, you're too small, we said, well, behind the door is 500 engineers, but it's very secret, so we can't let you in. And that was the first time I realised that marketing is really important. Now, where I come from, Cambridge University, there's lots of technical people who are very, very clever at technical things. And they think that all you have to do is make a product the best, and that's it, it wins. And of course, the reality is, no one takes any notice. You have to have marketing as well. There's a saying in Cambridge that if you build the world's best mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. Actually, no one will come unless you have a big neon sign that says mousetraps. Marketing is really, really important, and it's something that you have to put together with the technology to be successful. So I started to learn these sort of things and how to put them together, and the business grew. We were very lucky in that because the things that we did had big technical advantages, it meant that every time you sold one, you got more money that could run the business very well, and you grew very quickly, and things took off. And eventually we got to the point where the business was doing very well, and we could list it onto the stock market, we could IPO it. And we did that. Lots of things change when you do that. There's lots of regulations and paperwork, and you spend a lot of time not doing a real business, but the big advantage is that then you can raise big amounts of finance, and you can go buy other companies and that sort of stuff. And we did that originally on what was called ESDAC, which was a European stock market. It doesn't exist anymore, because London was so far behind that the rules meant that you couldn't list in London. And then eventually onto the American market, and then London changed its rules, and we were able to list onto the London market. So what I wanted to do now was really tell you some of the things I learned in that journey. So Autonomy went from 0 to being worth $11 billion. So it was a very big journey. And then there was a series of other companies that spun out of that, so Lynch, which does video search and so on. The first thing I learned about actually transferring technology and running businesses, that focus is everything. So if you start a business or you start working in a small business, lots of people will come and tell you all the things you have to do. So the local accountancy firm will turn up and they'll give you a long list of things you have to do, and the lawyers will tell you a long list of things you have to do, and the HR people will tell you a long list of things. Ignore it The most important thing is to work out I do 5 things a day, but work out what are the things you really want to get done each day and get those done. 5 is a good number. If you get it done, you can do some of the other things, but the vast majority of what you're told to do, you don't need to do. Okay? And some of it's also a bit crazy. So one of the things you'll get is let's say 2 of you here start a business, right? If you go to see a lawyer to set your business up, the lawyer will probably tell you that it's really important you have a really strong agreement between the 2 of you, right? And yes, they're right in one sense, but they're wrong in another sense, in that if you 2 are starting a business and you need a legal agreement in order to play fair with each other, you shouldn't be starting a business. So a lot of it is about the practical understanding of how these things work. The biggest example of this I see is email. So when you're out in the workplace, what will happen these days is you go in the morning and you open up your computer and you'll have 100 emails or whatever, and people just sit there and they go through the emails answering them. What that means is you're not doing what you decided you wanted to do, you're just reacting to the emails that are coming in. And it's the biggest waste of time in our modern world, because of course you then reply to something and you hit reply to all and 8 people get it and then they all have to read it and reply to it. So you have to be really strong these days to actually do what it is you want to do each day and keep that focus and don't allow it to break out. Now, there are people in the world that can run businesses where the amount you make each time you sell something is tiny, called very low margin businesses. You know, if you, I don't know, are manufacturing biscuits or something like that, the actual margin on those is tiny, right? The wonderful thing about technology is the margin is generally very large, because if you solve a problem no one else can solve, you can make a good margin each time you sell things. But you only do that in the technology world if you have something which is much better than what else is out there. And the saying I always have for this is, always take a gun to a knife fight. There's going to be a fight and the other guy's got a knife. You want a gun, you want an unfair advantage. And so whatever you're doing, when you think about starting a business, make sure that the business you start has a big advantage when you start. One of the big mistakes I see when people want to start a business is that they have something which is as good as the other guy, and they think that's enough. There's a number of times people send me something which is a social media site just like Facebook. The important thing they've done, Facebook's over, they're doing okay. You're not going to push them away, or you invent a drink with bubbles in it and sugar, and you're going to think you're going to get rid of Coca-Cola. It's not going to happen usually. So the important thing is, when you start, pick an idea where you do have a really big advantage, because by the time that comes to the market, because of all the noise in marketing and how long it takes, the advantage gets a lot less, but you can still actually do something. The next one is people. In the technology world, the most important thing is the people. It's everything. The biggest mistake I see is that people end up starting businesses with people who are just like them. So what you'll see is the MBA people will get a little group of MBA people who will start a business. The engineers will get some more engineers and they'll start a business. What you want in a business is you want people who know different things and think about a problem differently working together. Having carbon copies or similar people doesn't work. So for example, when I give this talk in Cambridge, I get asked sometimes to talk to the MBA class. And the MBA class is very, students who are very ambitious and want to do things. And they come up to me afterwards and they'll all bring an idea. And there'll be little groups of 3 of them, and there'll be someone who wants to sell you toothpaste online or something crazy. And what you suddenly realise is that 400 yards down the road is the engineering department where the engineers sit. And in there, you go and talk to them, it's completely different. Some of them are a bit scruffy. Frankly, I'm not sure they've had a bath for a while. But it doesn't matter. They have amazing ideas. And what I say to the MBA guys is, go 400 yards, meet those people, then what you'll do is you'll find some amazing piece of technology or amazing idea, and you have the skills to market and sell it. So if any of you come to decide to start a small business or to move technology and start a business, what you want is a group of people that have got different ideas, not the same ideas. So if you're an engineer, you want someone who knows about marketing or managing or selling. If you're someone who knows about running a business, you want someone that's actually got an idea that's pretty fundamental there. So try and hang out with different types of people. The next one is about prediction. Very famous Danish physicist, Niels Bohr, said that prediction is very difficult, especially where it concerns the future. And the important thing is we live in a world where whenever you turn on the television, there's some politician or business leader telling you what's going to happen. And the most important thing to understand is no one knows what's going to happen, okay? But we have a culture where we have to pretend that we know what's going to happen. So the important thing when you run a business is don't fall into the trap thinking you know what's going to happen. Whenever you make a decision, you always have to make a decision on, okay, I'm going to bet on this happening, but if it doesn't happen, then I'm going to make sure that I can handle it by doing that. It's what's called hedging, and it's the most important thing in a technology business because you can never predict exactly what's going to happen. So always, when you think about things, your thinking should always be, I think that's going to happen, but if it doesn't, then this is going to happen, and I'll make sure that I've got that arranged. So don't try and be sure that you know what the answer is. So, just to wrap up, in terms of my area, which is technology, we are in an amazing time. The power of a smartphone now is what was a supercomputer when I was doing my PhD. The thing can see, it can hear, and the processing power of that is doubling every 6 months. Storage is becoming almost cost-free. You know, the idea, I'm so sad, I'm an engineer, that every time I walk past a shop and it has a hard disk drive, one of those 1 terabyte hard disk drives for about 50 euros, I have to buy one because it's just so exciting, the idea that you can have that much storage. Because I come from a world where you could have 1 kilobyte storage. So the world is just changing at such an amazing rate. Connectivity, the ability to get information all the time. But the most important change that's going to happen is that the computers are starting to understand, and that changes everything. So for example, if a computer can listen and understand what's being said, or it can see and understand what it's looking at, then suddenly all this information, you can get value from it. It has big issues for society. You know, so for example, in England we have lots of CCTV cameras all over the place. People get very worried about it. It actually doesn't matter because no one's watching them. You know? It gets very different when the computers can watch them because the computer never sleeps and the computer can watch thousands and it can work out you've walked from here to here to here. So the world is going through very fundamental change. Some of those things are a big challenge for society, but there's also massive opportunities if you grasp those changes, think about them. If you're running a business now and you use some of the new methods which are called analytics, it completely changes the business. So for example, you're an airline and you're selling air tickets from your website. Just by using what's called analytics on the website, you can increase the revenue off of that website by 15%. Now the important thing is you're not changing the airplanes, you're not changing anything other than how the computer's changing the website for each customer to interact with them. Now, if you imagine 2 airlines, and you've both got the same cost base, and one of them is getting 15% more sales off of the website, you can see that these analytics technologies are really very, very important. Another one is car hire, actually. 15% higher sales per customer coming in because the system automatically works out how to offer them a GPS upgrade in a way that gets the most money out of them. So you can't ignore this stuff. The other side of the equation is all of your interaction with customers now is through things like websites, your social media. You know, if you go to the UK now, it's very hard to find a bank branch. It's all done online. It's all done through mobiles. But what that means is also big risk. So cyber security is going to become more and more important because people will bring down whole companies. It's not the simple problem that anyone likes to talk about, people hacking in. Actually, the biggest issue is all the people already inside that you gave passwords to. Because even if they don't mean to, they can do a lot of damage by accidentally downloading something they shouldn't or whatever. So there's going to be a lot of challenges, but a great deal of opportunities. And I think the most important thing about all of this is it's just beginning. The first part of the internet that you've seen, which is all about, sitting at a keyboard and typing stuff in, that's just the overture, that's just the beginning. We're about to see technologies now called augmented reality, where you can wear something, the computer is continually looking at everything you see, it's recognising all the objects automatically. You don't have to type anything, you see a bottle of wine on the table, you say, tell me about that wine. And then into the view, it projects an object. What you see, that object is perfectly real, but it's not there. It's the virtual world and the physical world becoming one, becoming completely melded. So for example, it might be a little 6-inch high man who walks out a bottle of wine and tells you where the grapes were grown and why it's really good. And you want to buy it, you just say, get me a price. Price appears and then you buy it. So this is going to change so much about how we interact with information, but it's also going to change things like the creative arts. You're going to have the ability to do very new art forms that you just couldn't do in the past, and that's really going to be quite incredible. So, amazing kind of opportunity, you just have to do it. One important thing about starting a business is it's very easy to work out why something won't work, okay? Any idea, you can come up with a reason why it won't work. In fact, I have a very old article from the Institute of Entrepreneurs, 10 reasons why any good idea won't work. It's much harder to give a little bit of space and light to a new idea and let it grow. So the important thing is when someone tells you why something won't work, stop them. First of all, make them tell you why it will work. Let them think about the possibilities, and then when they've done that, they can tell you why it won't work. So it's very, very important to allow ideas, like little seeds, you have to let them grow a little bit first before you decide whether they're good ones or not. Because we live in a culture that's very negative. It's very much about why things won't happen, why things can't be done. But with what's happening in the technology world, all sorts of things can happen that could never happen before. So that's me finished. So I think now the idea is to have more interaction. So
Yeah.
hopefully someone will ask a question. What would you like to know about?
Any questions? Don't be afraid, ask.
How you came up with your first idea? I mean, with the fingerprint. It just came, just sudden.
Well, I was doing research in trying to get computers to recognise things, and so that was from an academic point of view, and we made some advances, and then I sat down and I thought, well, what could you use this for? And fingerprints was an obvious one because it's a very precise problem. You put in the fingerprint, you get the answer, that's it. And then I found out that it was something where you talk to a few people, I said, oh no, if we're one of those machines, we'd definitely buy it. So it's that process. Now, at the moment, I now have $1 billion fund that I invest in European technology. So people like yourselves, someone has a great technology idea, that's what I invest in. Now, I reckon we say to people that we'll do, where there's fundamental technology, so something clever, of what I get sent at the moment, about 90% there's nothing clever. So we're just like Facebook, better. Okay, and so those ones we forget about. And then the remaining 10%, 5% of those are the most wonderful idea of technology that you've ever seen, and it is no use to anyone. And those ones, I love the technology and they're wonderful, but there's just no reason why anyone would want this thing. You just can't see that. And then the last group is the 5% where it's a great idea and you can see why people would want to use it. So that's really the main thing, is to make sure that you can see why someone's going to want to do this. Sometimes it's not easy. Remember when mobile phones were invented, Motorola did a survey of people and the only possible use for them was for sales reps. Because all the people they were asking had never had one, they'd never thought about what it'd be used for, so they couldn't understand the fact that, you know, teenagers would be sending selfies of themselves backwards and forwards all the time, you know.
How do you usually find your markets?
So what was on?
How do you usually find your markets when you have a product? How do you find your markets?
The main, it really comes down to the listening. What you have to do is, one of the things I always say to people is, whenever you meet someone, try and come away with something. So, one of the things that will often happen is you go to a company and you think you're going to sell them this thing you've invented, right? And you have a meeting, and it becomes clear that the guy is not interested, doesn't want to buy it, has no need for it. Now, at that point, a lot of people will say thank you and leave, right? The most important thing to do is say, what else is happening in the company at the moment? What's your biggest problem? You know, and it's amazing. People will sit there and they'll say to you, yeah, well, everyone's running around because we've suddenly got this crisis because we got sued and we've got to find all the documents about this and we can't find it. And then you suddenly realise that there's a real need there that they have. And the point is, that's an actual problem they're dealing with today. And then you know that you've got a good possibility of having a market. And if you can find that you've got some technology that you can point that way. So for example, one of the things that I did was we had wonderful search technology, where at the time everyone's using Google on the internet. But by talking to customers, I found out that searching their own information when they had a legal problem, the court said they had to bring all the documents that were relevant, and if they didn't, they went to jail. But they didn't have any technology to do it. And that turned out to be a great market. And it's because you're continually looking and you know, what are the problems? What's stopping your swimming pool business growing faster? And they'll tell you, oh, well, it's the problem, we can't get this, or we can't do that. That's then when you see the spot that you start thinking about a market. And you've got a ready-made first customer to call as well, which is great.
How do you present an idea to a person who's supposed to fund you? Or who you would like to feed
Yeah.
from?
There's lots said about this in the world. It depends on the different types of funders, but if you're starting a business, you're most likely to be talking to either friends, families, or angels. And you know, when people talk to me about angels, I always think about beautiful women with wings, but actually we're talking about middle-aged business people usually. And the good thing about them is they generally run a business. And so really what they want to hear is, what's the problem? How's it going to solve it? How are you going to get to the right people? And it's a very, very practical business approach that they will want to take. And the way they'll work is you'll convince them with that, and then they'll want to check all the other things. Right? If you go to a very formal venture capitalist, so someone who's perhaps never run a business but is from a financial background, then it's going to be all about a very formal business plan with graphs and things in it and that sort of stuff. And the important thing to understand about that is I have never seen a business plan actually happen, ever. So even if that's the sort of dance that gets played, the important thing is when you start running the business, you have to change it, you have to do what you want to. I would much rather be with the person who's run a business funding me than with a pure financial investor, because they understand all the problems and the ups and the downs and how you have to change things and everything. Important things are, you know, why is it different? What's the advantage you've got? What's your gun versus everyone else's knife? How are you going to tell the story? Marketing. If you put that in, they know you've thought about it. And then basically, you know, an idea of the financials. How is it going to work? How much are you going to make each time you sell one? How big is the market? You know, I had a wonderful A couple of guys come in a few years ago, and they'd seen the success of Shazam, you know, the app where you hold it up and it tells you what music is, and they've gone one stage further, which was that rather than having to listen to the actual music, you could just sing into this thing. And I got a demo of this, and it turned out that the two of them were sang in the choir of King's College, Cambridge, so like some of the best singers in the world. And they sang a 17th century folk song into this computer, and the computer sat there and up came the name of the folk song. And they were very, very happy with that demonstration. And then I called my receptionist, and I said, come in here, sing a song at this, and we'll see what it does. And being a receptionist and not an expert on 17th century music, she chose Madonna's Material Girl, which she sang completely out of tune, and the machine didn't get it. The important point being that the market size for 17th century choral scholars is quite limited. What they needed to do was make a machine that would work for the receptionist of the Royal singing Madonna. So those are all sort of key aspects about making. But the reality for an investor is almost the most important thing is the people. So one of the things I'll often do is I'll get a group of people, and they'll come in and I meet them and I think, you're going to do something, you're going to do something, you're going to be successful. But sometimes I'll say to them, I will invest in you, but not with this idea. And that's because they missed the gun in the knife fight role. And what we see is sometimes those people come back in 2 years' time and they've got the gun and then you go for it. So the people are very, very important in doing actual investment.
One more question because we have time. Yes.
Mike, what's the role of the government to innovation? I mean, you know that the situation in Cyprus is a bit difficult, and I know that you've been consulting the UK government in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship.
So there's a lot of debate about this, and so what you see is some governments try and pick companies or pick winners. That's a disaster. Governments are very bad at that. The best analogy is that the government's job, if it was a garden, is to make sure the soil is good and well tended, to make sure that they cut down the big trees so that some light gets in and there's drainage. That's it. Your job is to grow the stuff. What I mean by that is that they can create an environment that's helpful, but generally they can't do more than that. A lot of what they often do is to get out of the way. So in the UK, for example, some of the changes that have been very powerful are, first of all, they've gone to the universities and they've said, we're not going to value all subjects you teach equally. Big step in the UK. So for example, if you want funding, you've got to do things that are useful. And they're quite generally useful, so research in physics is still okay. But perhaps we're not going to put as much money into understanding ancient Assyrian texts or whatever. That's important because that moves things back. It's also said to the universities that you have to show you're making efforts to get the ideas that are generated in universities into businesses. And again, that's very powerful because it means that the academics realise they have to at least think about this kind of thing to do that. The next one is early stage funding. If you're an investor, to invest in a very small company is actually very high risk. But what you can do is you can make the risk less by giving a tax break for those kind of investments. And the tax break only pays off if the company is successful. So the government doesn't lose anything because it's going to get all the taxes from the company being there, but it makes it a good idea. That's very powerful. Another one is share options. So young companies can't pay their staff lots of money, but what they can do is give parts of the business to them as options, and that means very good people can work in startups, and the businesses don't have to pay very high salaries. Those people end up making far more money if it's successful than they would ever got a salary. It's a different model, and making that happen. Things like leases. Small business can't afford to sign up to a 5-year lease. It wouldn't get through the credit checks. Whereas if the government arranges a framework where you can get monthly leases in office space. That can be a real boost to businesses. And then things like the exits. So the reason why investors invest in these businesses is they make money when the businesses are sold. So looking at how the exits can be made to work more effectively. So, you know, there are lots of things. When I started Autonomy, there was pretty much no example of startup to world class in the UK. And through my journey, a lot of those things have got fixed by little tweaks from the government. They made some mistakes as well. And now you have a lot of companies in the UK that have gone from 2 people in a garage to $11 billion. You know, every processor in your phone is probably a UK product from ARM. You know, lots of the software powering those things. So it is absolutely possible to do it. And what government has to do is get out of the way in some bits, and then in other bits just give a little bit of incentive to make things happen. So I think we're out of time. The main message to say is often we're in a world where there's an establishment which has come from a traditional approach in traditional industries, and to grow a business for any size might take 50 years, and the constraints of those businesses, you know, can be things like geography and things like that. For your age group, it's completely different. We're entering a world where a lot of the way in which things are constrained has changed. You know, you can write software anywhere in the world and send it anywhere. You can have your intellectual property anywhere. You know, you can sell to customers anywhere. You can get instantaneous price comparisons. These are all fundamentally different things from traditional business. And so the important thing to understand is that the things you're doing in your age group, you can do things that just weren't possible, just were inconceivable in terms of how to structure businesses and make things happen. And what that means is you have to be far more optimistic than perhaps previous generation were. A very simple example, I met some business leaders on this trip at Cyprus who are all from traditional industries. And there was a great deal of pessimism around the after effects of the financial crisis and the Troika and all this. A lot of conversation was about that, okay? For your age group and businesses, it's irrelevant, trust me. Because if you've got a great idea, there are people around outside Cyprus who will happily invest in it, okay? Perfectly happy. They don't care that this is Cyprus. If you've got a great idea, and Cyprus has a whole series of wonderful advantages. You know, geographically where you are is phenomenally useful because you're right on the edge of the Eurozone on the east. Everyone's very interested about what you do in that direction, but they want somewhere with stable, well-educated people with good rule of law to actually be the spearhead for that. Cyprus is a great place for that. It's actually a great place. You know, a big problem I have in the summer is my software writers all go to Ibiza and cut code sitting on the beach. Why not do that in Cyprus? It's a great place for it. So you have opportunities, you can do things, and what my last message to you is just do it. I nicked that from Nike, but just do it. Because you don't have to worry about the constraints that people have, the traditional industries have. And all this recent stuff about the euro and everything, it will end up being irrelevant because of the changes that are happening. So get on with it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lynch, for your presentation. It was very nice. We'll keep in touch though for the FREng Commission, right? And we'll be sending you all those proposals.
Yeah, that's right. Remember, you've got to show me where the market is. Though.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. Apologies for trying to take your job there.
No, it was much cold and busy.
Elena, τώρα προσπαθούμε να κάνουμε τα social media.